It is a pleasure to have you here for our conversation, our Meet the Candidate event with Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont at the Minnesota State Fair. Great turnout here, Senator, today. So thanks for taking the time to do this with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for hosting this.
Yes. I'd love to start right in, if we could, with what I think is a very basic but important question. And that is, why are you running for president again? What are you doing this for? Tell us, why?
Well, let me begin by thanking...
All right, let the senator answer. Let the senator answer, please.
Well, first of all, let me begin by thanking the people of Minnesota for the really strong support we had in the last campaign. Thank you, Minnesota. But in this campaign, we're not going to take anything for granted. We're going to be back here in Minnesota. We're going to work as hard as we can to once again win this very important state. But let me answer Tom's question. And Tom, there are two fundamental reasons why, after a lot of thought, Jane and I decided to do this again. Number one, it is absolutely imperative for the future of this country that we defeat the most dangerous president in American history. This country cannot continue to have a president who is a pathological liar, who conducts public policy via tweets, who is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, and a xenophobe, and a religious bigot. We are a great nation, and what every president before Trump has understood is that when you are president, you bring people together, black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American. We are all Americans. You don't act as Trump is doing, trying to divide us up. That is not what a president does. Second of all, Tom, it is not just about defeating Trump. This country today faces enormous problems. For the last 45, 50 years, there has been a war against the working families of this country. And almost all new income and wealth is going to the top 1%. We need an economy. We need a government that represents all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. We need to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a human right. And I am proud to be leading the effort to make sure that we pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. I'm running for president because the future of this country rests with our young people. I do not want to see tens of millions of young people buried on the mountains of student debt, which is why we're going to cancel all student debt in this country, and why we are going to make public colleges and universities tuition-free.
All right.
And Tom, lastly, I'm running for president because we have got to address the obscenity at the level of income and wealth inequality that exists in America. And as president, let me tell the 1%, and let me tell profitable large corporations, they will begin to start paying their fair share of taxes.
Now, Senator, you bring up a number of topics there that I want to get to, a number of issues. But first, I want to talk about Medicare for All specifically. Now, here in Minnesota, thousands of people are employed in the health insurance field and allied medical fields. We have a medical tech, robust medical tech industry here. These are high-skilled, good-quality jobs. What would happen to them, especially at a large corporation and employer in Minnesota like United Health Group? Health Partners, what would happen to them and the companies that provide them if Medicare for All is put in place?
Let me answer the question, Tom, in this way. I'm going to answer it in detail. What we have got to recognize are a couple of facts. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. And what we have got to recognize, Tom, is we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. Second thing we have got to understand is that in this dysfunctional system, we are now spending twice as much per person as do the people of any other industrialized country. The function of health care must not be simply to provide $100 billion in profits to the insurance companies and the drug companies. But function of health
But the workers here in Minnesota.
I'm going to get to it, Tom. I really will. All right? But the function of health care should also not be to force Americans to pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. The function of health care should not be, and this is really quite unbelievable. Last year, 500,000 Americans went bankrupt because they suffered a serious illness and could not afford to pay their medical bills. That is insane. All right? 30,000 people died last year because they did not get to the doctor on time. 87 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured. That is what we're dealing right now. Now, when we move to a Medicare for all, will there be dislocation? But we provide a period of time to make sure that all workers who might see their jobs go because they're involved in billing and other areas will get jobs in a new and growing healthcare system, which in fact will provide more jobs than the current system because we're going to cover all of our people.
Senator, how will that work? Will the insurance companies under Medicare for All be, in effect, put out of business and made illegal?
Medicare today is the most popular health insurance program in this country. Okay? The function of a private health insurance company is what, folks? What's its function? It's to make money. That is its function. I happen to believe that the function of a rational and sane healthcare system is to provide quality care to all, not to make $100 billion in profits for the industry. So what we will do, Tom, this is the plan, and it really is not complicated. What right now, the first thing we will do in the first year is to expand Medicare to cover what it does not cover now, which is dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses. And in that first year, we will lower the age of eligibility, which is now 65, down to 55. In the next year, we go to 45, then to 35, and then we cover every man, woman, and child in this country. So we are going to answer the question of why we spend so much more than other countries, why so many of our people are uninsured or underinsured, why so many people are actually dying in America today because they cannot afford the prescription drugs or the health care that they need. So a Medicare for all system will give all of our people freedom of choice regarding the doctor you want to go to, freedom of choice regarding the hospital you want to go to, and like our brothers and sisters in Canada, there will be no deductibles, no premiums, no co-payment, no out-of-pocket expenses. And when you eliminate all, the overwhelming majority of the American people will be paying less under a Medicare for All system than they do today under our dysfunctional system.
Now, I assume in formulating this that you have had conversations with some of the larger healthcare providers. And I'm thinking here in our region, Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic has been in the news over the last few years of preferring private insured patients to patients with Medicare because of the reimbursement is higher. And so how would that work for, again, a huge employer and a huge economic driver, Mayo Clinic?
There will be global budgeting for hospitals. Look, right now, when you have a private insurance motivated system where the function of the healthcare system is to make money, bad things happen. What we do, as the Canadians will do, is we provide global budgeting to great hospitals, not only like the Mayo Clinic, but to small rural hospitals all over this country.
Right.
Because when the function of the system is not to make huge profits, but to provide health care to all, the dynamics of the system change radically.
Another issue here in Minnesota, some controversial projects on the drawing board here involving copper nickel mining. One is known as Twin Metals. And it's proposed close to the Boundary Waters National Canoe Area Wilderness. Supporters say that will mean good jobs, good union jobs. Opponents say it's too risky for the environment. This opinion has even been across party lines. It doesn't necessarily split here in Minnesota along party lines with our members of Congress. So would you support that project? Would a Sanders administration approve the necessary permits that would be required for a project like that?
I honestly don't have as much knowledge as I should about that particular project, but let me just say this. We have obviously a major global crisis in terms of climate change. And this is not an issue that we can beat about the bushes on, that we can nibble at the edges on. I am perhaps the strongest pro-worker, pro-union member of the United States Congress. But I also understand, unlike the current president of the United States, that it is important to listen to scientists. And what the scientists are telling us is that we have fewer than 12 years to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, or there will be irreparable damage done to our country and to the entire world.
And I want to get to that because you've released a plan, a climate plan this week, and I want to dig in.
We also have a President, Tom, who has taken away many of the strong environmental laws to protect our clean air and our clean water, and I will certainly reestablish and restore those provisions.
So, comes to the Twin Metals project close to the Boundary Waters. Where would you come down on if you had to grant the permits?
You're asking me a question which I don't know all the details, but I would simply say that in this day and age, we must be enormously concerned about the environment. We must be enormously concerned about clean water and clean air. And that would be my...
And how do you balance that, what you're thinking, when it comes to providing union jobs?
Well, again, I'll tell you how we do that. We are going to provide millions of union jobs when we transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. We are talking about retrofitting buildings, millions of buildings throughout this country to make them energy efficient. We're talking about building an electrified transportation system. We're talking about massive investments in solar energy, in wind energy, and in other sustainable energy. Add all of that up in terms of my climate change program that we just released, talking about 20 million new jobs, union jobs, good-paying jobs.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Green New Deal, which you released this week, and just the broad contours of it, because there's a lot in it. It's an over $16 trillion project. That's about 4 times the annual budget of the United States government, right? So how does a nation, any nation, and this nation, make a massive investment like that? And what kind of return do you see on that investment?
Tom, I think, in all due respect, it's the wrong question. The right question is, what happens to this country and to the planet if we do not transform our...
So how would it work?
Tom,
how would it work?
Question. Let me answer it.
Yeah, how would it work?
All right, there it seems to me to be 3 options with regard to climate change. Number one is the Trump answer, which is based on ignorance and based on a willingness to get enormous amounts of campaign funding from the fossil fuel industry. So the first response is to say, well, climate change is a hoax, or we're not sure whether it is real. That's one response. I categorically reject that. Climate change is real. It is already causing devastating problems, and it is caused by human activity. That's number one. The second response is one that says, well, yeah, climate change is real, but we got to be realistic. We got to do a little bit of this, maybe a little bit more investment in sustainable energy, a little bit more investment in energy efficiency.
Some of your Democratic opponents take that approach.
That is right. I reject that, and I'll tell you why I reject it. I reject it because if you believe in science, then you got to listen to the scientists. And Tom, what the scientists are telling us is the future of the planet is at stake. We are talking about rising sea levels that will impact severely many coastal parts of our own country and the world. We're talking about the acidification of the oceans, which will have unbelievable ramifications for this planet. We are talking about more drought. We're talking about more flood. We're talking about more extreme weather disturbances. If you talk to the intelligence agencies, they will tell you that the likelihood of war grows because when people around the world can't grow crops, can't find drinking water, migrate into other people's land, and that causes national security issues. So I happen to believe that this planet faces an unprecedented crisis. We must respond in an unprecedented way. That is what my legislation is about.
All right. I want to dig in a little more about what the plan would do. And you talk about reaching 100% renewable energy for electricity and transportation by no later than 2030 and complete decarbonization by 2050. And that would include commercial jets. That would include trucking. That would include so many of the things that make the country work. How would you get there? And is that too ambitious?
Here's the question. I mean, it's a fair question, Tom. But if we are talking about the future of the planet,
yes,
what do you mean by too ambitious?
Is it achievable?
Is it achievable? If we are not bold,
is it achievable politically? That's one of the...
Well, then I think you got to ask somebody else that question and get them up here and say, why are you supporting policies that may well lead to the creation of a planet that is increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable for our kids and our grandchildren? So we have got to be realistic. And being realistic is not meaning what some Republican may or may not support today. Realistic is, do we save this planet or do we not? All right? I have got 7 beautiful grandchildren. And I want to make sure that this planet is a livable planet for them and for the children all over the world. And let me just say this, Tom, you didn't ask me this question. I know you will. I'm going to save you some trouble here.
I haven't asked too many questions, actually,
right.
but yeah.
This is also, let's be clear, this is not just an American issue. We could do all the right things tomorrow, and we are not going to solve this problem. That's what makes it unprecedented and enormously difficult. Right now, we got a president who ignores the reality of climate change, and in fact is making it worse by promoting fossil fuels. I believe we need a president, and his name is Bernie Sanders, who will aggressively reach out to countries all over the world. You got to involve China and Russia, India, all of the countries of the world, and maybe at this historical moment, unprecedented moment, say to those countries, instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, why don't we work and combine those resources against our common enemy, which is climate change?
Okay. I have a couple of housekeeping matters here. First of all, we do hear you in the back, and this is as loud as we can get the sound system. Be aware of that. This is as loud as we can make it. If you can't hear everything in the conversation, tomorrow we'll have it on the air at 2 o'clock. Tomorrow, Sunday afternoon, on NPR News, 91.1 in the Twin Cities. So, wanted to let you know that. Now, we are taking questions on Twitter. People are sending, and they're forwarding to me. Here is one directly related to climate change. Why does your Green New Deal reject the expansion of nuclear as an alternative to fossil fuels? Because some of your Democratic opponents have that as part of their fix for climate change.
For a couple of reasons. The production of new nuclear facilities is enormously expensive, for a start. Far more expensive than moving to solar. Second of all, we have an enormous amount today of nuclear radioactive waste. We don't know how to get rid of it today. So I don't know why you want to build more nuclear plants when we don't know how to get rid of the nuclear waste, the very dangerous, long-standing waste. Can be here for thousands of years. So I think that the future of energy is in energy efficiency and sustainable energies like wind, solar, geothermal, and other sustainable technologies.
You have said, you tweeted the following: oil rig workers are not our enemy, coal miners are not our enemy. But when you release a plan that would seriously curtail the use of fossil fuels, it will have an effect on their industry and their jobs. So what is your plan? What is your message to those workers, beyond that they're not the enemy, about the future of their jobs?
Here is my message to them. We understand that they're working in the coal mines, and they're working in the oil rigs, and they're working to provide a decent living for their families. Workers are not my enemy. Climate change is my enemy. And that means, Tom, to be very specific, we put tens of billions of dollars.
How would it work? Yeah.
Tens of billions of dollars into what we call a just transition program that says to those coal miners and people in the oil industry, we are going to get you good-paying jobs. You are going to have education that you need. You're going to have the health care that you need. We're not going to throw you out on the streets.
And finally about this plan, before we get to some audience questions here, and that is, does it rely largely on executive action from the president for things that cannot be done if, for example, the Senate stays in Republican control?
Well, for a start, I'm going to do everything I can to see that the Senate does not stay in Republican control. Now, a lot of this is going to be based on legislation, but as President of the United States, what I understand is that change, whether it's climate change, whether it's civil rights, whether it's women's rights, whether it's gay rights, real change only takes place when millions of people stand up and fight for it. And I think right now, led by the young people of this country, we are seeing millions of people understand that for the future of this planet, we have got to stand up to the greed of the fossil fuel industry and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of the planet. So we will use executive orders when we can. We're going to fight for strong legislation otherwise.
Let's take some questions from the audience here as we continue with our Meet the Candidate event with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders from the Minnesota State Fair here on NPR News. Mike Mulcahy, you have a question here from the fair.
Hi, just give us your name and your question. Hi, Senator. My name is Margarita Ruiz. As a Mexican-American, I am also familiar with hearing about human rights violations at our southern border. How will you as president ensure that human rights are of utmost importance?
Thank you, Margarita. I mean, one of the reasons why Trump must be defeated is that he looks all over the world and he loves authoritarian type governments. I happen to be somebody who believes and has spent his entire career fighting for human rights and fighting for democracy. And what that specifically means, say, in terms of immigration in our own southern border and immigration policy in general. President of the United States, we are going to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship for the 11 million undocumented. Through executive order, we will undo what Trump did. We will provide immediate legal status for the 1.8 million young people in the DACA program. And on the southern border, we will not continue a policy in which U.S. government officials snatch babies from the arms of their mothers. We will not put children into cages. We will end the ICE raids, which are terrorizing communities all over this country. And we understand that when a mom takes a little baby on a dangerous 1,500-mile path from Honduras to Guatemala in order to flee violence and extreme poverty, that mother and babies are not criminals.
I want to, before I get to the next question, I want to follow up on that. And you know, as well as anyone, that President Trump has made the immigration issue a central issue of his first campaign and his re-election campaign and his presidency. And he says and will continue to say, as do other Republicans, that Democrats are for open borders. So what is your response as you shake your head there to that? What's your response to him about that?
I know this will shock the audience, but Donald Trump lies. Nobody I know, not me, not other candidates, are for quote-unquote open borders. What we are all for, and I think I can speak for other Democratic candidates, is ending the demonization and the racism which is coming out of the White House. See, when you have a bully and a demagogue who's president, he doesn't have the guts to take on Wall Street, doesn't have the guts to take on the insurance industry or the drug companies or the big money interest who control so much of our economic and political life. What a bully does is pick on people who have very little political power. That's what demagogues do. So we are going to end that demagoguery. We're going to end that racism. We're going to bring our people together, not divide us up.
What changes, that said, what changes to our immigration policy would we see under a Sanders administration?
Well, what you would see, for a start, is movement for comprehensive immigration reform. And this is what the American people want. Trump talks about throwing millions of people out of this country. He's crazy. That would not only is that immoral, it would destroy the entire economy of the United States. Because it is by the way, let me say something on this issue about immigration. I am the son, the proud son of an immigrant. And it is the immigrants of this country who have built this nation. The immigrants who do the hardest work, the lowest paying work. So to answer your question, what we will do is comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship for the 11 million undocumented. That's the direction that we go in.
A lady in the audience yelled out, abolish ICE. Do you agree with that? Would you abolish ICE?
It is abolishing the current disastrous immigration system. And ICE is one small part of that system. We have to develop a system, but I will say this. We will abolish the ICE raids, which are terrorizing communities all over this country.
But that said, do you see a valid purpose for an agency in the federal government like ICE? Immigrations and Customs Enforcement.
The first question you asked, do I believe in open borders? No, I do not. So you need to have protection of our borders. You need people to do that.
All right, we have another question. Marquita Fornoff is there with somebody up in the front here. Hi.
Hi, Senator. My question relates to your program for federal student loan forgiveness.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how that would work moving forward for any future loans for private schools.
What we will do, everybody hear the question? Okay. What we're going to do is several things. Number one, we start with the premise that in a highly competitive global economy, our young people need the best education possible, regardless of the income of their families. So what we do is make public colleges and universities tuition free. We significantly increase funding for the historic black colleges and universities. And we cancel all student debt. What we also do for private colleges and universities is substantially increase Pell Grants and work-study programs so that if you want to go to a private college, which is certainly your right, you will also be able to get out of that college with minimal amount of debt.
Again, the question, and I know you've answered it before, the question that comes up is, how is that paid for? Because we're talking here about over $1 trillion in student debt, $2.2 trillion.
Good question. And Tom, even that's an absolutely fair question, and people have a right to know how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
But let me back up and look at where we are as a nation. Right now, how do we pay for $1.1 trillion in tax breaks that Trump provided the 1% and large profitable corporations? How do we pay for Amazon, a corporation that made over $10 billion in profits last year and didn't pay a nickel in federal income taxes? How do we pay for bailing out the crooks on Wall Street with a $700 billion bailout 11 years ago and trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans from the Fed? How do we pay for those things? How do we pay for spending more on the military than the next 10 nations combined? How do we pay for the reality that over the last 30 years there has been the top 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, and 3 people in America own more wealth than the bottom half of the American society? How do we pay for all of that? Well, and let me answer you. On this bill, this legislation to make public colleges and universities tuition-free and cancel all student debt, we pay for it by a modest tax on Wall Street speculation that will raise $2.4 trillion over a 10-year period.
Senator, have a sip of water. Take a moment here to do that while we get another question from the audience. But I do want to follow, before we do that, tell us briefly the mechanism there of that tax. You say in speculation, it's investment. There are different categories of investment and different percentages of tax. How would that work?
It's a very modest tax, I think less than 0.5%. And by the way, it's a kind of tax that exists in other countries around the world, not a new idea.
On stock trades,
Yes,
for example?
exactly.
Yeah, stock
Absolutely.
trades, bond
very modest
purchases?
trade.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. We have another question here in the audience.
Your name and your question.
Yeah, all right. My name is Liane Gale. My question to you is this. So I know about your strong support for workers and labor, but I've never heard from you or any other candidates talk about unpaid labor that is often performed in households and in communities and often performed by women. How will your administration value all this unpaid labor that is performed in communities that is so important for the fabric of our society and should be kind of lifted up?
Thank you for that very excellent question. One of the ways we deal with it, and I'm not going to suggest this is going to solve all of that problem, is under Medicare for All, finally what we will do is pay for home health care. Okay, now that's a big deal because you're a lot of elderly people and people with disabilities who would much prefer to stay at home rather than end up in a nursing home, which is much more expensive care. And we will provide payment for those people, whether they are family members or not, who take care of the elderly and the disabled in their homes. But Tom, if I could jump
Yes.
in here.
Go ahead.
It is absolutely fair to ask the question how you pay for this program and that program.
Yes.
But it is also fair to understand where we are today in terms of the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality. And this is an issue we don't talk about in Congress, and the media spends much too little time talking about it. So we are starting from the proposition that there is something wrong when the top 1% today owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. When people all over Minnesota and Vermont and all over this country are working 2 or 3 jobs at starvation wages, while 49% of all new income goes to the top 1%. So when we talk about how we are going to pay for this program or that program, fair question. But we start off with the promise, with the premise that we will end this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, demand that the wealthy and the powerful start paying their fair share of taxes, and when you do that, you have the resources to provide for the needs of working families in this country.
It's a Meet the Candidate event from the Minnesota State Fair with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders here at the NPR booth on NPR News. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tom Cran. Marquita Fornoff has a question from the audience for the senator. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator. My name's Tony. Oh, God. My name's Tony. I'm from Rochester, and I'm 17 years old. I'm going to be voting my first election in 2020 for the Democratic candidate. And I went school shopping for my senior year, and I saw bulletproof backpacks being sold. And according to the New York Times, there's been a surge of sales of bulletproof backpacks for kids. And I just want to know how you'll be able to approve a policy of gun control and not, anger Republicans too much to the point of a complete split in the House. As Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So I just want to know how we're going to deal with that.
All right. Everybody hear Tony's very important question. And to be honest with you, this is such a horrific and emotionally painful issue that it's really hard to talk about. I don't want to talk about the insanity and the horror of what we have seen in El Paso and Dayton, and we've seen in communities and schools for the last many years, of people walking into a building or a school and shooting down and massacring innocent children and men and women and so forth. But let me answer Tony's question by saying this. What I will do is what the American people want us to do, and that is finally pass common sense gun safety legislation. Now, this is not just my idea. This is what the American people want. And let me be very clear. When I talk about corporate power, whether it is Wall Street or the drug companies or the fossil fuel industry, you got to put up there the one organization that has so intimidated Trump and the Republican Party that they refuse to do what the American people want. That organization is the NRA. So today we say to the NRA, you will no longer dictate gun safety policy in the United States of America. So what does that mean? I don't have the time to go into all of the details. What it means and what the American people's support is expanding background checks. People who should not own guns because they are a danger to others or themselves will not own guns. We do away with the so-called gun show loophole. We do away with the straw man provision, which allows people to legally buy guns and sell them to criminals. 30 years ago, I will tell you, that I believed that the sale and distribution of military-style assault weapons was wrong. Under a Bernie Sanders administration, we will end the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country, which are designed for one thing alone, and that is to kill as many human beings as possible. Those are some. There are other ideas that are out there. But bottom line here is the American people, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, gun owner or not, the American people want action. It is horrifying. What Tony said is absolutely true. All over this country, there are children who are frightened about going to school. Schools used to be a place of safety, a place where you learn, a place where you socialize. Can we imagine now from coast to coast, kids and their parents are scared about school? So we're going to do everything we can to end this horror of mass shootings in America.
Now, Senator, a question on Twitter that we got from Daniel is a great follow-up to that. Because if Democrats don't gain control of the Senate in 2020, and I know you said it's your desire that they do, what will be your strategy for passing legislation, especially when it comes to changes in our gun laws? A harder sell with a Republican-controlled Senate.
It will be. Again, I will do everything I can to see that we end Republican control over the Senate. But I want also, Tom, to understand, our campaign is a different type of campaign. And that is that as president, I will not only be commander-in-chief of the military, in a sense, I will be organizer-in-chief for this country as well. And what that means, very soon, I think in a day or two, I'm going to be going to Kentucky.
Okay.
Going to Kentucky. Why am I going to Kentucky? I am going to Kentucky to tell Mitch McConnell to have the guts to stand up to the powerful special interests who are hurting the working people of Kentucky and the working people all over this country. I'm going to Kentucky to say to Mitch McConnell, bring gun safety legislation to the floor of the Senate. I'm going to Kentucky to tell Mitch McConnell, bring the $15 an hour minimum wage bill passed in the House to the floor of the Senate. I'm going to Kentucky to tell Mitch McConnell that we do not want the intervention of Russia or any other country in our elections. Legislation to the floor to protect the integrity of American elections.
But, Senator, if I can interrupt for a second, as a U.S. Senator, that is one thing. But as the president, do you then have, because President Obama certainly was frustrated with some issues in the Senate with Mitch McConnell, including a Supreme Court nomination, what can you bring to bear on that if the Republicans control the Senate?
What you can bring to bear is rallying the American people against those politicians who are more concerned about campaign contributions from the rich than the needs of working people in their own state. All right, you go to Kentucky and you ask the workers there, that's a poor state, whether they want a $15 an hour minimum wage. I think they're going to say yes, and I think that's true all over America. So my job will be to rally the American people around an agenda that works for workers, not just the 1%. And when you do that, you put pressure on Mitch McConnell, and again, I hope he will not be majority leader, but other Republicans who do the bidding of the wealthy and the powerful.
Addison on Twitter has a question that is pegged to today's news. A lot of talk of a recession. We've got a volatile stock market. We've got more tariffs now with China, a trade war that's escalated, a jittery G7 meeting, which the president has called a nightmare. So Addison asks, economic indicators have shown another recession may be coming. What's your plan to get the American worker through that recession?
Good.
What can you do as president?
Well, I think that's a great question, but let me start off with the fact that for millions of American workers today, they are in a recession right now. All right? If you are making 10, 11 bucks an hour, you're in a recession. If you're spending 50% of your limited income on housing, you're in a recession. If you can't afford child care for your kid, you are in a recession. If you're one of 87 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, and you can't go to a doctor when you're sick, you are in a recession. So it's not like things are great. Things are great for the 1%, large corporations. But what we need are policies that work for working families. So let me tell you what we will do in response to Addison's question. We can create up to 15 million jobs rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. That's our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our wastewater plants, our airports. It means building millions of units of affordable housing and putting a whole lot of workers at union jobs to work doing that. It means taking on and combating climate change with millions of jobs being created there. So we have an agenda that will raise the minimum wage to at least 15 bucks an hour, that will create many, many millions of good-paying jobs as we rebuild our economy and make it work for workers and not just the 1%.
I want to follow up on that one more before we get our question, an economic question. And that is the president berating his own Fed chair on Twitter, asking if he or Chairman Xi of China is, quote, the bigger enemy. What sort of relationship would we see with the Fed chair in a Sanders administration, even when there would be, I'm sure, disagreements, because there is a school of thought that the Fed chair does not work for the president, but works for the economy and full employment?
Well, I will appoint a Fed chair who works for working people, not large corporations. Appoint a Fed chair who understands that one of the responsibilities of the Federal Reserve, as you know, is a full employment economy at decent wages. That's the Fed chair I will appoint. Look, I always hesitate to comment on what Trump said, because 5 minutes from now he's going to say something different. You know, a few months ago he loved President Xi, a great humanitarian in China. I guess today he's President Xi and China are our enemies. He loved the head of the Federal Reserve 2 weeks ago. Now he's an enemy of the American people. He loves the media, hates the media. Look, you got a president whose temperament, whose ugliness, whose hatred is such that he should not be in the White House. Every other day, he's attacking somebody else in really ugly terms. Now, I don't know the chairman of the Fed. I don't know him at all. But to suddenly call him an enemy of the American people, you know, is beyond comprehension.
Okay. We have another question, Marquita.
Hi, my name is Maru Leaf Sample. My question is, what do you think President Trump, he banned in 6 countries, include Somalia? So my family leaves Somalia. So what do you think that Muslim ban?
We will end the Muslim ban. You know, without saying that you want policies And it's a no-brainer to say that we all want policies to keep America safe, that we want to keep terrorists out of this country. That's a no-brainer. But that we have a president who has referred to Mexicans as rapists and criminals, who is clearly anti, who is, before he became president, was the leader of the anti-birther movement, trying to delegitimize the presidency of the first African-American president in our history. And it gives me no pleasure to say this. This is a president who is a racist. Who is a racist. And we will do everything that we can to end racism and white nationalism in this country.
Senator, forgive my next question. It is a bit blunt, but it also comes from Andrew on Twitter, and I had thought the same thing. How do you respond to people who say, at the age of 77, that you are too old for the presidency?
Follow me on the campaign trail. Look,
let the senator answer, please. Let the senator answer.
when we look at a candidate, I hope and believe and know that the American people are going to look at the totality of that candidate. Most importantly, you're going to look at how the candidate stands on the issues relevant to working families. And I dare say there is no candidate who has a track record stronger than I do in standing up for the working class of this country. You may want, Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in the 1930s, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, the ruling class of America hates me in an unprecedented way. Well, I think you can judge me by the people who hate me as well. We are taking on the entire corporate elite in this country, an elite that has been at war with the working class of this country. And when we stand together, we in fact are going to defeat them and create an economy that works for all of us. You can judge me on the number of picket lines that I have been on with working people throughout my entire life. But most importantly, I think, you can judge me by my vision for the future of this country. All right, and my vision is that we have a government that fights for a working class today which is in serious trouble, that we fight to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. We do all of the things that are desperately needed and wanted by working people. So is age a factor? It sure is. But so is experience, so is vision, so is a track record.
We have another question from right up here in the front for Senator Bernie Sanders at the Minnesota State Fair.
Senator, my name is Asan, and I came to Minnesota from Pakistan as an international student. I wanted to ask you what your policy is as far as economic immigration is concerned. It's becoming increasingly difficult for international students to get jobs in the United States because employers are not willing to hire international students. So I just wanted to ask what your policy would be.
Well, I think what Trump's racism has done is brought a whole lot of instability in terms of immigration. So we want an immigration system that is a fair system, that is a non-racist system. As I mentioned to you, my dad came to this country at the age of 17 without any money. So we are going to fight for an immigration system that helps our country, that is fair, and that is non-racist.
Senator, I have another question from Twitter. I have a couple here, but here's Caleb. Wonders, have you considered what can be done about our homeless veterans and homelessness at large, especially resident here in the Twin Cities?
I sure have. And one of the issues as a nation we do not discuss enough and we don't talk enough about is the housing crisis. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. 530,000 people should not be homeless tonight, including over 30,000 veterans. So when we talk about a housing crisis and we talk about the need to create jobs, well, I know how to create jobs, and that is millions of units of affordable and low-income housing this country desperately needs. We're going to get, when somebody puts his or her life on the line to defend this country, that person should not be sleeping out on the streets.
Whether it's the Green New Deal or infrastructure repair or building low-income housing, when you talk about the creation of these jobs, do you see that as a function of the private sector or the federal government?
The federal government is going to have to play a very, very significant role. Because the truth is, you don't make money by building low-income housing, because low-income people don't have enough money to pay for the housing. You do make money by encouraging gentrification of working-class neighborhoods, and that has got to stop. So I think, clearly the federal government is going to play a major role in transforming our energy system, and we're going to work with the private sector in every way possible.
We have another question for Senator Bernie Sanders here at the Minnesota State Fair. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Sam from St. Paul. I wanted to talk about criminal justice a little bit. Your platform on that has been great. Yesterday, oligarch David Koch passed away, and we're going to be dealing with his. We're going to be dealing with pollution and the radicalization of his politics. He's made a killing off of the misery of other people. And I want to talk about retroactive justice. How would you follow up for the victims of folks who are coming down in the future generations?
Your question went into several different directions. I don't applaud, the death of somebody. We needn't do that. I think what we can say is that the Koch brothers and other billionaires, because of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, have been able to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful and the fossil fuel industry, which is where the Koch brothers made a lot of their money. Now, in terms of criminal justice, let me say a word on that issue because it's enormously important. We have a criminal justice system today that is fundamentally broken and is racist. All right? We have more people in jail, and we have got to ask ourselves as a nation why it is that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. We have over 2 million people in jail. That is more than China has, a country 4 times our size that's a communist authoritarian country. All right? So what are we going to do? For a start, most importantly, in terms of criminal justice, we're going to invest in our young people in jobs and education, not more jails and incarceration. Right now, 20% of the people in jail, some 400,000 people today, at this moment, they are in jail not having been convicted of a crime. They are in jail because they cannot afford cash bail. In other words, these are debtor prisons. It's like Charles Dickens' time. We're going to end cash bail in America, get those people out of jail. I had a funny experience. The week ago, I was in Nevada. And you drive in Nevada, and there's huge billboards advertising the sale of marijuana. You got large corporations selling marijuana, doing exactly what people who are in jail today did 2 years ago. And that is pretty crazy. All right. People arrested for the possession of marijuana. And I think you made this point. I think large corporations profit off the legalization of marijuana. We should remember those people who went to jail for doing exactly the same thing as these corporations are and develop a system where the African American community can benefit from the legalization of marijuana.
Yes, exactly. Senator Sanders, we are almost ready to wrap. I have one final question for you, and that is, this time around, campaigning for president in 2016, what have you learned and are doing differently?
Well, one of the things that I learned is that many of the ideas I talked about 4 years ago that everybody said were crazy are now being talked about by every other Democratic candidate. And maybe that has something to do with leadership. I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with having the guts to say things that other people are not prepared to say. But at the end of the day, Tom, this is what I have learned. TV ads and radio ads and all that stuff are important. But at the end of the day, in Minnesota and every other state in the country, what is most important is a strong grassroots movement. And I am proud. I am really proud that here in Minnesota and all over this country combined, we have over 1 million volunteers prepared. 1 million volunteers prepared not only to defeat Donald Trump, but to transform this country. Thank you all very much.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you.